to the open forum of Simana, broadcasted by CYC. I'm sure there isn't a home, a meeting, even a discussion on the phone that will not tackle a topic as confusing and becoming as controversial as COVID vaccines. Not just every day, but every hour, there are new information. First, I want to give you some estimates of where we are today. Globally, this is a very bad pandemic, and you see the numbers. There is over 1.6 million had died as of today. If you look at the numbers per country, and I have put as many countries as I imagine CYC is broadcasted to, you can see the affected numbers currently in all of these countries. All these red dots is the second wave. This map happened to be from yesterday's Johns Hopkins tracker or center. And you can see there is a lot of red dots all over the world. Please do not be deceived that there are some places in Africa do not have as big dots. That does not mean necessarily they don't have an infection. Unfortunately, it may actually mean more that they don't have enough ways to sample or to screen their affected subjects. Just in case if you think we are off the hook, unfortunately, COVID-19 hospitalization rate is increasing across the states. This map from CDC is showing you the weekly COVID-19, and you can see now we are approaching higher hospitalization rate as we were back in late March and early April. Some of us are under the notion or the myth that pandemic or COVID-19 affects only the older population. This is a publication came from, again, CDC on October 2nd, and there is a big shift toward younger age occurring in all US Census regions, regardless of the changes in incidence during this period, and reflected in increased emergency room visits, positive PCR results, and confirmed COVID-19 cases. And those are the younger population, less than 24, between 16 and 24. All the audience, that please do not be deceived that the younger population are immune. Actually, this second wave is affecting the younger population as much, if not more. Look at the 18 to 29 years of age, and you can see how many are affected compared to what we were initially in the first wave. Again, if you think or you are under some notion that this is a political issue and nothing is happening, please believe us, there is a definite second wave. In New York, yesterday reported in New York 10,000 cases, new cases. In California is one of the worst badly hit states. Only yesterday reported 43,000 new cases just in one day on December 17. In Tennessee, close to 10,001 case in one day. Texas, 17,000 cases just on December 17. Florida, over 11,000 in one day. And in all the graphs, you can see that there was a dip during the summer, but unfortunately, we are catching up the second wave. Although this tracker does not include other countries, but for our Canadian audience who are with us now, there is also an increasing number in the Canadian provinces, and you can see from the Worldometer that there is an increasing number also in almost all Canadian provinces. Now I would like to shift the mic to Dr. Cecile Andraos. She is again our Ph.D. microbiologist and immunologist from Virginia Commonwealth University, and now she is going to handle very important question. What is messenger RNA? How does it work? Why messenger RNA? Is it safe or not? So now I will ask Dr. Cecile to please go ahead and speak.
Good afternoon, everybody. I just would like to first thanks Dr. Hani Ashamalla for inviting me, and thank you for the nice introduction, and thank you also to Dr. Rafat Bishai for inviting me also to this forum. So first, I would like to talk about the delivery system. What's a vaccine first? There is a slide before that, I believe. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's the first slide. Thank you. So how do vaccine work first? And vaccine, basically, they mimic infections. So they stimulate our immune system to develop immunity to, specific diseases without getting basically the diseases. So they prime our immune system to effectively fight off an infection. Just a second here. Let me do this. Okay, fight off to effectively fight off a later encounter with the bacteria or viruses. Next, please. So different types of vaccines against viruses. We have different types of vaccines. I just want to go over them, explain them a little bit. We first have the attenuated, also called live virus vaccine. These are made of complete virus particles, which lost the ability to replicate rapidly in their normal cells, as in smallpox and measles. Then we have the inactivated viral vaccines, and these are made of damaged viruses that cannot cause infection, as in polio vaccine. And also the Chinese, actually, COVID-19 vaccine is also an inactivated virus vaccine. The Chinese one is the one that actually Egypt will receive, I believe. The subunits or piece of virus protein vaccine, as in the case of hepatitis B or influenza vaccine. And then we have the newest one, messenger RNA vaccine, as in Pfizer and Moderna COVID-19 vaccine. These were never used before in human. There are a couple of other vaccines. Actually, there is also a DNA vaccine, and there is also a viral vector vaccine. But because they were not approved yet, I did not include them on my slide. So how do the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine work? I'm going to concentrate on these two and talk a little bit about how do they work. But before I really talk about how do they work, I'd like to talk about, what's the messenger RNA and give you just a brief idea about what is it and where is it in the cell and what does it do and all that. So let me talk about the biology central dogma. You all heard, of course, about DNA. DNA is the genetic makeup of our cells. It has, all the genes in our cells. And the DNA it stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and it's located in the nucleus inside the cell. I'm going to show you a diagram in just a second about that. So DNA basically has the information for all the proteins inside the cell. But in order to really make the protein, it goes through an intermediate compound first. So the DNA gets transcribed into what we call messenger RNA. Actually, it codes for different types of RNA, but I'm going to concentrate on the messenger RNA because the messenger RNA is the intermediate compound between the DNA and the protein. The DNA basically, again, has all the genetic information. It gives rise to the messenger RNA, not just one messenger RNA, but it gives rise to many different messenger RNA. And each messenger RNA is responsible for basically the production of one protein. It has the information to give rise to one specific polypeptide chain or protein. So the messenger RNA is a temporary compound because actually once it makes the protein, it gets degraded inside the cell. It gets degraded into nucleotides, the subunits of messenger RNA, and then the nucleotides get reused again and makes more RNA in general, or maybe more messenger RNA in particular. Next, please. So this is a diagram of the cell, and as you see in the cell is like orange in color, but you have this small circle inside, and that's the nucleus. The nucleus is where the DNA is present, and the nucleus and the DNA basically again gets transcribed into RNA, different types of RNA, like I said, and one of them is called the messenger RNA. And then the messenger RNA, it will basically get out of the cell, and ribosomes, something called ribosomes, they attach to the messenger RNA, and they start translating the messenger RNA into proteins. Okay, so from DNA you get the RNA, and from the RNA you make protein. The RNA actually stays inside the cytoplasm. Once it's, like I said, once it's translated, it gets degraded. It does not go back to the nucleus again, okay? So once it gets out, it does its job and it gets degraded, and that's it. Next, please. Okay, so this is a figure of the famous coronavirus, COVID-19. And we've all seen this before, and we've all seen these spikes on the surface of the virus. And these spikes are actually proteins. And now you understand that each protein is coded for by a specific gene, basically, and this gene gives rise to a messenger RNA, and the messenger RNA makes the protein. So basically what they did is, first the Chinese actually, you know, they sequenced the whole genome of the virus. The virus, by the way, is not considered a cell. It's not alive. We call it, like in case of live vaccine, we call it live, but it's not really alive. It's a particle. We call it a particle because it cannot replicate on its own. It can only replicate inside the cell, and it has its own genetic makeup. So once they found the sequence of the genetic makeup of the virus, and they published it in January 2020, and everybody, you know, found out about that, then they basically, the researchers, they were able to determine the sequence of the protein spike, the gene basically that codes for the protein spike. And they were able to produce the messenger RNA sequence. They synthesized it, the messenger RNA sequence of a piece of the spike, not the whole protein spike, but just a piece of it. They synthesized it in the lab, and they put it inside a lipid nanoparticle capsule. And basically, this is the vaccine. Why did they put it inside a lipid nanoparticle? Because the RNA is very unstable. So you cannot just inject RNA into someone's, you know, muscles or blood or whatever. It will get destroyed, you know, right away. So it cannot survive. It's very, very sensitive. So, you know, they had to put it inside something as a delivery mechanism to get inside of the cell. So the lipid nanoparticle is basically, lipid means fat, it's surrounding the messenger RNA to deliver it to the inside of the cell. Next, please. So this is a diagram showing basically, this is your virus. This is the virus, the coronavirus. And these are the spikes, the protein spikes on the surface of the virus. Yes. And once again, they found out about the sequence. They were able to synthesize the messenger RNA that code for the, you know, for the spike protein. They surrounded the messenger RNA with the nanoparticle, the lipid nanoparticle. And then basically this lipid, this is your vaccine. So then they injected it intramuscular, along, of course, with some salts and things like that. You're going to hear about them later on today. And basically, so these nanoparticles, they go and they attach to the cell. The cell actually engulfs them using a process called endocytosis. This nanoparticle gets inside of the cell, and the cell, once the nanoparticle is inside, the messenger RNA gets out of the particle, and once it gets out of the particle, it's going to get translated into the protein. And here you see, this is the cell, the human cell. This is the human cell now, and the human cell now has now the spike displayed on the surface of the cell. And once it's displayed on the surface of the cell, you have the immune system responding to this spike protein, and basically you have an immune response toward this spike in the form of antibodies and also T cells. I just want to tell you one more thing about this diagram here. It's not very accurate because the size of the particle is not as, the same like the size of the cell here. The cell is much, much bigger than the particle. The cell is in the micrometer range, but the particle is in the nanometer range. So definitely this is much, much smaller. That's why it can get inside the cell, through this process that's called endocytosis. The cell is basically eating this small nanoparticle. This ends my presentation, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Cecile. The next presentation about the vaccine components, sorry for the miswriting, Dr. Veronica Meawad, Fellow in Allergy and Clinical Immunology, Yale University.
Thank you so much for the invitation and for the introduction. So first, we'll start with talking about the Pfizer vaccine components. So now that you know what a vaccine is and what an mRNA vaccine is, we'll talk about each specific ingredient in the vaccine and how this compares to other common vaccines. So the Pfizer vaccine has several components. We have the mRNA, which is the only active ingredient. Then we have 5 lipids, and lipids are fats. Some of these are naturally occurring fats, such as cholesterol, and some are not naturally occurring. Polyethylene glycol, or PEG, is one of the lipids that are not naturally occurring, but is present in this vaccine. The fats are important because these protect the mRNA from being broken down by the body before reaching the cell. Next, we have several salts. So remember, it's very important to keep the proper pH of any solution once it enters our human body and once it enters the cells. So potassium chloride, this is a salt, monobasic potassium phosphate, sodium chloride, and dibasic sodium phosphate dihydrate. These are all different types of salts. Many of these are already present in our bodies. Sodium chloride is just your saline solution. Then lastly, there's sucrose. Sucrose is table sugar. This is to stabilize the vaccine in freezing temperatures. So those are all of the components in the Pfizer vaccine. Next, to talk about the Moderna vaccine, again, you have the mRNA, which is the active ingredient. Then the rest is very similar. It's the same concept. Lipids, again, very similar lipids, including cholesterol, as well as PEG, again, just similar to the Pfizer vaccine. You have something called Tromethamine, which is actually a common medication given to stabilize water and electrolyte balance. It's used more in other countries rather than in the US, but this is a common medication. Tromethamine hydrochloride is just another formulation of the same. Then you have acetic acid, which is a stabilizer. It sounds kind of scary, but it's in vinegar and it's in many other foods. You have sodium acetate, which is another stabilizer. If you read the, the back of most of your foods, you'll also find it there. And then again, you have sucrose. So again, these are all of the components in the Moderna vaccine. So a note, compared to other vaccines, these vaccines do not contain what we call adjuvants. So adjuvants are used to increase or potentiate the immune response. Adjuvants such as alum, which is a derivative of aluminum, is present in many other vaccines. It's not necessarily bad. I'm just pointing out the differences. Alum is placed in other vaccines to increase our immune response. It is not present in the mRNA vaccines. There's also no formaldehyde. So formaldehyde is used to inactivate vaccines such as the flu vaccine, or the flu virus, I mean. It's used to inactivate viruses. Although it's mostly taken out of things like the flu vaccine, there could be small traces. There's no formaldehyde. There is no egg protein. Some vaccines such as the flu shot are, derived from egg protein as well and incubated. There's no thimerosal, which is a preservative. There are no antibiotics. There's no polysorbate 80, which is an emulsifier, and which some people have reported allergy to specifically this component, which we call an excipient, as a component of several other vaccines, as well as IV solutions. So in general, these vaccines are relatively low risk for allergic reaction given few allergenic components. And this goes for both mRNA vaccines. So let's talk about allergic reactions, since we're hearing a lot about this. So allergic reactions can happen in response to anything foreign that enters our body. Almost all drugs, including vaccines, can cause an allergic reaction. We need to first define what an allergic reaction entails. There are different kinds of allergies. There is your most life-threatening, scary, type 1, IgE-mediated anaphylactic reaction that is, between 15 minutes and maximum of 1 hour after receiving a drug or a vaccine. That is the kind that we're all afraid of. That is an anaphylactic reaction. The percentage of people who have drug allergy in general is very low. Only about 1 to 2% of hospital admissions are for actual anaphylactic reactions. Again, just to reiterate, anaphylaxis does not occur a few hours or days after a certain drug or vaccine. It's within the first hour after receiving it. And every site is equipped to deal with immediate reactions. It's treated with epinephrine, as well as sometimes antihistamines and steroids. Also to keep in mind, there's a difference between allergy and intolerance. So you may have an intolerance to a certain drug or vaccine, such as stomach upset, nausea, vomiting, any other symptom. If it's an intolerance, remember that is very different from what we define as an allergy. So to address everything that's happening, of the now thousands of people who have received the Pfizer vaccine, only a few have reported serious allergic reactions. This is common to any drug or vaccine. This is not out of the ordinary. The only contraindication to receiving the COVID-19 vaccine is a prior history of anaphylaxis to another vaccine. That is currently the consensus in the field. So food allergy, medication, environmental allergy, all of those are not contraindications to receiving the vaccine.
Thank you very much. It was great. Our next speaker before we start answering questions is Dr. Nardeen Mikhail, infectious disease specialist here in New York. She's an assistant clinical professor in Zucker School of Medicine, Hofstra University. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for the introduction. It's my pleasure to be here. We had met with Simana in April, and we were discussing all the different problems of COVID and diagnosis and symptomatology. And it's very exciting for me that about 5 months later, or 6 months later, here we are starting to talk about vaccines. So that's very exciting, especially after the hundreds and hundreds of patients that we took care of the past 9 months. So I'm going to focus mostly on the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine, which is also, and the study itself is called BNT162b2. The reason we're starting with this was the first one that was approved with emergency use authorization by the FDA. That was on December 10th. And their original article was published in New England Journal of Medicine in December 10th, showing the whole phase 3 clinical trial in details. So just to give you a brief idea how a phase 3 clinical study works, phase 1 and 2 involves very small number of people. Phase 3 involves tens of thousands of patients. So they started off with 44,820 participants. And the reason I'm showing this briefly is because if we look down the line, the numbers will shrink because of many factors. Either people get lost to follow-up, Either people, get withdrawn by the physician itself. Either people don't even meet the inclusion criteria anymore, and we will talk about who's excluded in a second, or people will start getting the first dose and choose not to go to the second dose, or people fall out for other reasons. So going down quickly, we see that they started with 44,000 participants, and in the end, we actually reached about 37,000 participants, about 18,800 in one group, 18,800 and change in the other group. And this is what we call a double-blinded randomized controlled study. What does that mean? That those people are totally blinded. They don't know what they're receiving. A group will receive a placebo, which is not a real vaccine, not real medication, and a group will receive the vaccine, and they will follow them through. Next slide, please. So when we look at those people who received, the first dose of the vaccine, they were monitored along. And then the reason, again, I'm showing this is if we look at both ends of the placebo and the end of the vaccine, we will notice that one patient died on one end, one patient died on another end. And why is this very important? Because we need to remember that those patients throughout that period when they're getting monitored, things could happen, and we can't always link every cause effect together. A patient gets the dose and leaves and has a massive heart attack. Is that from the vaccine or just because they did happen to have a massive heart attack? So that's why it was very important looking at the people who dropped out from both groups to see that a lot of things happened in the placebo group that also happened in the vaccine group. At the end, we had the people who received the 2 doses with about, again, 18,000 and change on each group. What are the results on the vaccine briefly out of those 18,000 and change from each group? I underlined here that the results were a total of 170 cases of COVID 7 days after the second dose. So their primary endpoint was to look at patients who got the second dose of the vaccine, wait about a week, 7 days later, to see how many patients got COVID. So about 180 patients did get COVID. 162 were those assigned to the placebo, and only 8 cases were those assigned to the vaccine. And out of those, if we read further on, 10 of those 170 cases were severe COVID, and 9 of those severe COVIDs were in the placebo group, and only 1 was on the vaccine group, but the one within the vaccine group occurred actually between the first dose and the second dose, and not after the full 2-dose vaccine therapy. So if we look at the vaccine efficacy, which is the 2 main things that we are concerned about, safety and efficacy. So we look at those numbers with the 8 cases from the vaccine group versus 162 cases from the placebo group. That study proved that it's about 95% effective. And that efficacy was very equal across the border between different ages, between different sexes, races, ethnicity, obesity. Remember that those clinical studies weren't only done in one country, they were done at least over 4 different countries. And it's noteworthy to say that this study only started with people from ages 16 and up. So who are the ones who were excluded from the vaccine study? They're children. It did not include children, but currently it's noteworthy to say that they're having a new study of younger age group from ages 12 to 16 to try to see how they respond to the vaccine. Pregnant women were excluded from the study as well. They had pregnancy tests prior, but among the ones who got excluded along the way are women who were not pregnant and ended up being pregnant within the study. Another group that was excluded were the immunosuppressed population, people who are on chemotherapy or who are on immunosuppressive medications. They were also excluded from this study. HIV, hepatitis B, and hepatitis C, which are a big category of people, they were excluded in phase 1 and 2 of the clinical trials, but not in phase 3. They were actually included as long as their viral loads were stable and their immune status was stable. So in this graph, this is a very encouraging graph. It shows the placebo group is the top line in blue, and the vaccine group is the red line down below. And it basically shows that 95% efficacy we spoke about. Now, the vaccine is recommended in 2 doses, 3 weeks apart, 21 days. And like I said, the primary endpoint was checking 7 days after the second dose. That should be the peak of the immunization or the immunity to the virus itself. But this graph also shows us that around day 12, it started to show pretty much a good response. All right, so that's speaking of the efficacy. How about safety? Safety is a big concern of many people. So this graph shows us all the different side effects that were encountered by that vaccine. Most commonly, it was local reaction. And the reason for the local reaction is really what we call reactogenicity. It's basically your body's immune response responding to that vaccine. So most commonly, just local reaction, pain around the injection site, which is common with many other different vaccines. Some reported fatigue, headache, chills, some reported some body aches, and fever. But even the fever was in a smaller percentage, and it was more on the low-grade fever, although a few did encounter, but very minimal, did encounter a higher fever. Now, those side effects were noticed to be higher in the second dose of the vaccine, more so than the first dose of the vaccine. Less than 2% did have severe systemic reactions, and the severe included a higher fever, greater than 39 degrees Celsius, including going to a hospital, feeling a lot worse. But overall, statistically, if we look at all those side effects, they were actually worse than receiving a flu shot, but they were kind of better than the Shingrix vaccine, which is for zoster. About less than 1% of patients did have serious reactions, which included lymphadenopathy, which is swollen lymph node glands all over the body. Heart attack, again, wasn't a clear cause effect. Was it anything related to the vaccine, or was it like the heart attack that happened with the placebo group? That's still going on further studies. Some patients did have Bell's palsy, were reported as well. About 4 patients had Bell's palsy, which is paralysis of the 7th cranial nerve, but even that wasn't directly linked to the vaccine, and the percentage was less than the percentage of the normal population that would get Bell's palsy unrelated to a vaccine. Now, adverse effects, the companies themselves and the patients and the healthcare providers encourage anyone who have any severe adverse effect, obviously, to report to this VAERS, or the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, which is very important to track, because obviously any new medication, not just a vaccine, when given to 30,000 people in a study is very different than when given to 30 million people. Once it's widespread, we are expecting to see more side effects. So it's very important to report it to know more about it. Next, please. So quick comparison between the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine and the Moderna vaccine. Now, the Moderna vaccine just had a hearing at the FDA Advisory Committee only 2-3 days ago on December 17th, and it just received its emergency use authorization by the FDA, and it's expected to start getting shipped over in the next day or so. Those two vaccines have more that are in common, way more than what's uncommon. So what's common between them? They're both messenger RNA vaccines. They're both approved to BioNTech, Pfizer is 16 and older, Moderna is 18 and older. So they're both still undergoing further studies for children. They're both very comparable in their efficacy. Pfizer is 95%, Moderna was about 94.1 or 0.5% roughly. They both involve 2 doses. The Pfizer was 21 days apart, 3 weeks apart, but Moderna was 4 weeks apart, so 28 days. Side effects, same thing, very comparable. It's all the local reaction of the arm pain, the fever, the headache, the fatigue, and again, they both more so after the second dose. What's really different between the two, it's not much so for the patients or the general population, but it has to do with the hospital, with the delivery, with the injection itself. The Pfizer involves a severely cold cryogenic storage tank. It needs negative 94 degrees Fahrenheit, which causes a problem in storage and delivery and distribution, makes it a little harder to reach smaller villages or other remote areas. Moderna, just a regular freezer works, negative 4 degrees Fahrenheit works. The other differences is Pfizer needs to be diluted, needs constitution of the vial, and the vial itself can give about 5 doses of the vaccine. And once it's diluted, it can stay outside for about 6 hours, not any longer than that. So it goes longer than that, it gets thrown away. Moderna vial doesn't need to be diluted, and it can give 10 doses on the vaccine. So it's really more so for nursing and for the people administering the vaccine, more so than the difference between the patients. Next, please. So briefly, Moderna results. Moderna only published the phase 1/2 preliminary data on New England Journal of Medicine back in November, but only in the most recent FDA hearing on December 17th that it did publish some data, which we'll go through here yet. So it's not yet fully published for us to read, but according to that FDA briefing documents that was released a few days ago, they said they basically enrolled 30,000 people, and 14 days after the second dose, and when they started to compare the numbers as opposed to 7 days in Pfizer. 196 cases had symptomatic COVID after. 185 of those were in the placebo group, and about 11 were in the vaccine group. So the efficacy makes it 94.1%. What's also more that Moderna presented additional data trying to show that the vaccine also appears to reduce asymptomatic infection by 2/3, which is very important as far as contagiousness epidemiologically, because the asymptomatic infections are the most contagious. People don't know they're sick and they're going around spreading the disease itself. So there are other vaccines that we're not going to focus about much today, which are the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, which is completing their phase 3 study. I think we're more focused on messenger RNA vaccines currently and what's approved and what we have. There's a Johnson & Johnson vaccine that should be finishing up its clinical trials as well. And there are a lot of questions about the Chinese vaccines and the Russian vaccine, which again, we don't have much data for, and we couldn't find any published data for. But briefly from our research, there are 3 Chinese vaccines going on right now. One is the CanSino Biologics, which uses a whole different methodology with a human adenovirus as a vector to carry the protein, the spike protein, and that's the one that's used currently in Pakistan, Mexico, and Russia, with maybe some partnerships in Latin America. And again, I don't have any more data on it. I don't think there was any published. There's the one that's Sinopharm, which I think is the biggest one that's using an inactivated virus. It's so far proposed that it's about 80% efficient, and that's the one that's totally endorsed by the United Arab Emirates, in Egypt, Jordan, Peru, and Argentina. Then the other one is the Sinovac or the CoronaVac, that's also an inactivated vaccine. As far as the Russian vaccine, again, no data was really published, but it's again using an adenovirus as a vector. Next, please. So last thing I just wanted to talk about with vaccine hesitancy. I don't know if I would want to categorize vaccine hesitancy as part of the anti-vaxxers who would not totally take vaccines. A lot of people with those current vaccines, because it is a new vaccine that's coming out, they're very hesitant to take it. They're not against it, but they might want to wait a little bit just to see what's happening before they start taking the vaccine. And this hesitancy isn't really a new concept. It was interesting to see that in the 1700s, at the time of smallpox, when smallpox was killing millions of people, Dr. Jenner is the one who started the whole smallpox vaccine, and he got it from the virus of a real cow. It was called a cowpox vaccine. And at that time, all these cartoons, like the picture on the left, came out that the people who were very hesitant, they started drawing cartoons of people growing cows on their bodies or starting to have horns because they were very reluctant to take the vaccine. And once they did, years later, smallpox was totally eradicated, and it's nothing that we even hear about these days. The other one, interestingly, was polio. When the Salk vaccine came out in the 1950s, and polio was killing and many people, especially younger children. A lot of the older people were very scared to take the vaccine, and there was a lot of hesitancy then until people were more educated and more encouraged when they started seeing some people and even celebrities there take the vaccine. So with that, I'm gonna turn it back to Dr. Hani.
Start with Dr. Cecile first. Can I receive my first dose from one company and the second goes from another?
No, that's not actually a good idea. We're not supposed to do that. The reason is vaccines are different. We just heard about how different companies are coming up with different vaccines. Even vaccines, when they look very similar, like the Moderna and the Pfizer, they're really very similar in having messenger RNA surrounded by lipid nanoparticle and all that, but they're still different. The nanoparticle is different. The lipids, the fat in one is different than the other. And even the messenger RNA codes for a specific piece of the spike protein, it's different. The piece for the pharma is different than the piece for the Moderna. So it's not a good idea to do that. Stick with one vaccine. If they're asking for 2 doses, you can take the 2 doses of these two this specific vaccine.
For all the audience, I know that you will be given a card with the batch number, the name of the company, the date of the first dose, and the date of the booster dose, whether it's Pfizer or Moderna. If you are in a different country, you still have to have some sort of that. But I'm told that it's very strict, at least given to the front line. This is how we are receiving it. The next question to Nardeen: can patients with prior COVID infection receive the vaccine, whether they had immunity or not? What do you think?
Yeah, so actually it is recommended for them to receive the vaccine because we don't know how long the natural immunity after COVID lasts for. And that we have seen clinically too. We had patients who got admitted in March and in April and they were positive. And then we checked them later. We had patients who never mounted antibodies in the first place. We had patients who mounted antibodies and lost them. And on repeat labs, they don't have them anymore. And we did all see patients with recurrent COVID. They had it back in March and they had it again. So from what it seems that the natural immunity doesn't really last too long. We don't know how long it lasts. So yes, it is recommended for patients who had COVID to receive the vaccine. It's not very clear how soon after, but the consensus currently is from 2 to 4 weeks after you're good to go. Some people said 30 days later. Some said as long as you're out of quarantine, you may go ahead and do it.
Thank you. Veronica, can the virus be given to immune-compromised individuals?
So the question, can it be given? Yes, it can. There is no contraindication for immunocompromised patients to receive the vaccine. But again, the Pfizer study did not include what they defined as immunocompromised, meaning patients who were on immune suppression, and did not really define like different autoimmune diseases. The phase 3 study did include Hep B and C patients. We do not know what type of immune response these immunocompromised patients may have to the vaccine. What I can tell you is that among the hundreds of patients that we see in clinic who are immunocompromised or even immune deficient, we often do recommend vaccination with common inactivated vaccines, such as the flu shot. And since mRNA vaccines do not contain any viral components, it should theoretically be safe in immune-compromised patients. But we do not have any data, unfortunately, to say that it's necessarily safe. So the answer is that we just don't know yet.
Dr. Cecile, do you want to comment on the same question? Do you have any further additional points?
It's basically, I wanted to say the same thing like Veronica said. That's the RNA, again, it's an RNA vaccine, so no live virus in it. So basically, it's definitely safe, not a problem. Yeah. And remember, the RNA gets degraded very quickly inside the cells. So it's really...
While you are at it, a lot of people are worried that they can get infected to become COVID infected from the vaccine. What do you think the answer to that?
It's the same answer. No, they cannot. And the reason is, again, it's not live or attenuated, live attenuated or anything like that. It's just RNA. It's a piece of RNA. So where is the virus going to come from? So they cannot get the infection from the vaccine.
I hope everybody's listening hear this, because it's a very common misconception or misperception that I'm going to be infected. You are not getting a virus to begin with. You are basically getting a protein. The next question to Nardeen: And this is also a very common misperception. How long would I be immune? 1 year, 3 months? How often you think I will need to take the vaccine again?
So, I mean, again, unfortunately, it's not clear at that point yet. This vaccine was only studied for 2 months so far since that phase 3 clinical trial. We are hoping, and the manufacturers are hoping, that it does obviously give lifelong immunity, but depending on what's going to happen with the virus, if this is a virus that's going to be constantly mutating, similarly to the influenza, they may update the vaccine and be an annual thing, at least in the beginning. So we don't know yet. I don't think we have enough evidence for that yet.
Veronica, can the virus, you spoke a lot about anaphylaxis, and also Nardeen spoke about the rarity of allergic reactions, but can the virus, or what's the chance of the virus causing anaphylaxis or severe allergic reactions? Are any of the ingredients of the vaccine can cause these anaphylaxis? And basically what I'm saying, who cannot take the vaccine?
Yes, so there is a risk of anaphylaxis, like I mentioned before, to any drug, including vaccines, also to any food. Some are more allergenic than others, and we've defined what are components that are more allergenic. Anaphylaxis, again, is a serious allergic reaction immediately after receiving a medication or vaccine or food, 15 minutes to 1 hour after receiving it, and over 90% of the time, there's hives or swelling. So welts all over your body, very itchy. That is how we define anaphylaxis. That is what we believe is life-threatening, what we know is life-threatening or can be, but we have treatment for it. Epinephrine is the most important treatment. The only contraindication, so per the CDC, which did release a statement today on anaphylaxis and allergic reactions to the mRNA vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine. If you have a history of a severe allergic reaction or anaphylactic reaction, as I just defined it, to a prior vaccine, then you should not receive the vaccine. If you have a history of allergy to latex, medication, or any foods, you can still and should still be vaccinated. This opinion was also echoed by Dr. Jordan Orange. He's one of the leaders in the field of allergy, who is the chair at Columbia. This is the consensus in the field. Again, just to talk about, for example, polyethylene glycol, if you've had a reaction to a prior vaccine or to an IV solution, and maybe PEG or polyethylene glycol is implicated, we can do skin testing in the office. You can see an allergist and get skin testing in order to diagnose that allergy. If you have a PEG allergy, then you should avoid vaccines or medications that contain PEG.
I just want to add, if I may, and my panelists are aware, we are aware of the 4 cases that reported earlier, I think today or yesterday in Texas, where 4 persons got allergic reaction. 1 of them was severe to the extent to get epinephrine. However, 4 of them are normal. The panelists, when we discussed that, this is still within the range of normal incidence of allergic reactions, and the only contraindication for the vaccine are those who have a severe allergy or anaphylaxis from prior vaccination, as you heard. Before I let you go, Veronica, I just received a message from our beloved Bishop David. Can you take more than 1 vaccine together? Like, for example, can you take the flu, COVID? And this can be any one of you if that's not your specialty, but I think it is.
Vaccines are often given together. However, since there are side effects, there are adverse effects to certain vaccines, including the flu shot and COVID and Shingrix. They all have side effects of fatigue, chills, fever, headache. It's advisable to take them separately. There's no reason why you should necessarily need to get them together. Get one, you have an immune response to it, and you will mount a fever, for example, have chills, a headache, let your body rest and get the other vaccine. However, like in infants, sometimes they are given all together.
Okay. For the sake of time, I would like you to be concise from now on, please, because it seems we are getting a lot of questions. Dr. Cecile, the next question is really, you can't imagine the number of questions we received. There is hundreds of misinformation that if I take the vaccine, my genetic makeup will be mutated, will be changed, I'll be a different person. Maybe something will happen in my genetic profile. What is the real answer to this?
This is not going to happen. The thing is, again, it's a messenger RNA vaccine. Like I said, the messenger RNA, it's made in the nucleus, it gets out to the cytoplasm. Once in the cytoplasm, it gets translated and degraded right away after that. So it does not stay to go anywhere close to the DNA. Plus, it cannot really go back to the nucleus to get to the DNA. So it's far away from the DNA. The DNA is inside the nucleus. The messenger RNA is in the cytoplasm, and it will get degraded in the cytoplasm. So there is no chance for this RNA to do anything to the DNA. Plus, usually, anyway, during transcription, the DNA and RNA are right next to each other, and they don't mutate each other or do anything to each other. So it doesn't happen.
Thank you. I think I wish I like the way she said it. As soon as she opened her mouth, it won't happen. I like that. She's just putting it out there. That's her specialty. Please do not believe the misinformation. We are not here to tell you what to do, to take or not to take. Our job and our prayers is to really settle down the myth, the truth from the misinformation. Nardeen, I know you brought up the hepatitis B and C in your talk, but if you don't mind, answer the hepatitis B and C. Can the vaccine be given? And what about breastfeeding? I know they are two different topics, but I want to try to combine a couple of questions.
Sure. So the hepatitis B and C, yes, they can be given as long as they're not on immunosuppressive medications for any, other reason. They were included in the phase 3 clinical trial, and they did well, just like the rest of the population. So yes, it is recommended that they get it. As far as breastfeeding, they weren't included in the studies per se, because the studies did not really have those patients. But as we spoke, as Dr. Cecile said, it's a messenger RNA. It does not carry an active virus. It doesn't carry any viral particles in it. So there's no reason that it's going to reach the baby, but the consensus between the obstetrician that it's not really a contraindication for it.
Thank you. Veronica, there is a question regarding if I have prior immunity from a prior COVID, and I think Nardeen partially answered this, but I would like to hear your opinion as an immunologist. I have some antibodies already. Why should I take the vaccine?
Yeah, so just like Dr. Nardeen had mentioned before, we don't know how long natural immunity from prior COVID infection really lasts. Not everyone also mounts an antibody response. So our immune system works in many ways. There's a T cell pathway, a B cell antibody pathway. Some people don't develop antibodies, and maybe it's their T cell pathway that's taking care of them. But you can lose your antibodies. You may not ever develop antibodies for some reason, which we still don't fully understand. You can also have antibodies but still be COVID positive per a PCR test and possibly contagious. So the answer is yes, you should still get a vaccine even if you've had prior COVID infection.
And if I don't mind, I hope you don't mind if I add, we clinically have seen more than one time infection. I think Nardeen may agree also. We have seen patients got infected and reinfected again. Dr. Cecile, we brought the breastfeeding. Maybe I should have bring the vaccination of pregnant ladies first. Some lady is pregnant and she's saying, oh, somebody told me my baby will be, have some abnormalities in it. What are the chances, or what do you think a pregnant woman can or cannot take the vaccine?
For pregnant women, even that they were not really part of the clinical studies, so we don't have concrete evidence, for what can happen. But we know that, in case of pregnant women, especially if their healthcare provider or personnel, the chance of getting infected is high. And plus, once they get infected, it could be very severe and can affect the baby. So if you kind of weigh the benefits and the risk, they really need to talk to their doctor and figure that with their doctor. But I believe the recommendation now is, especially for the healthcare personnel, is to go ahead and take the vaccine. But again, discuss this with your own, doctor to just weigh the risk versus the benefits.
Again, I hope nobody bother if I may add a little bit. I was in a talk with Dr. Laura Riley. She's the chairwoman of OB department at Cornell University, and she basically said she will vaccinate all her pregnant ladies because unfortunately, if they should develop COVID, there is much worse complications than the vaccine itself could make, mainly preterm birth. So it looks like all the medical field is going to vaccinate pregnant ladies because they get vaccination for other things. Nardeen, can you explain the topic of herd immunity and how does it tie to mass vaccination?
So herd immunity, basically, as the name indicates, is when the majority of the population, namely about 70%, they say depends on the virus, about 50 to 80% is immune to that kind of infection. That's when most people, whether it's a natural immunity or whether it's a medicine or vaccine-induced immunity. That's why with vaccinations, it was very important, just like the smallpox, as we mentioned earlier, when the majority of the population got it and when about 70% at least received it, then the incidence of the infection reduced dramatically. And we see this a lot with measles, for example. When everyone was vaccinated with measles, it was almost eradicated. Then areas that don't vaccinate and, because of different beliefs, they start having measles outbreaks. So that's why mass vaccinations is important to receive that herd immunity. Now, just on that topic, if I may, I know a lot of people, especially the younger age group, just felt, why do I bother with a vaccine? Let me just get the disease. It's easier. It's a joke. I'll be fine. I'll be immune and I don't have to worry about it. And the reason this is a very wrong way of thinking is for the fall. Just as like Dr. Hani mentioned earlier, the age groups is younger and younger. And honestly, in our ICUs, it's half elderly, half young people, unfortunately. So some younger patients can get very, very sick. So you really don't want to risk that. The other thing, even if you have a mild illness and you think, let's just develop herd immunity that way, you're risking a lot of the older population and the parents and the sicker and the immunosuppressed and others who may get it very severe. And like Veronica mentioned earlier, we don't even know how long this antibody lasts for. So that's why in this case, a herd immunity through vaccination will probably be way more effective than just a natural herd immunity, which we cannot afford with the hospitals too, having so many people sick.
Thank you. By the way, anecdotally, Sweden was one of the countries that believed so much in April in herd immunity. Then they came in June and they said we were wrong. A lot of our youth who we throw them into herd immunity parties or celebrations so they infect each other ended up by much worse infection, and some of them had to be on ventilators. So this is not something we advocate. Veronica, I want to ask a question and add to it something that just came from a good friend of mine. Can the vaccine cause a flare-up of other diseases like autoimmune diseases? And then that, my friend, has polio from before, since he was a child. And one leg is weak and the other leg is normal. He is worried now. Can I get the vaccine and get flare-up of polio?
So first, again, our data is very limited. So the answer that I can give is that one, why autoimmune diseases occur or flare up is a very complex question, and genetics as well as environment plays a role. We know that the vaccine does mediate the immune system. It can cause fever, fatigue, chills as side effects, and some of those are also seen in flares of autoimmune disease. How the vaccine affects the immune system has not been, readily tested on this vaccine. Again, we only have 2 months of data, and immunocompromised individuals were not included in the trials. We do know that other vaccines such as flu, shingles, pneumonia shots are all, so maybe not shingles because that's live actually, but the new shingles, not the old ones, so the Shingrix, are all recommended for those with autoimmune disease because the benefits often outweigh the risks. And those with autoimmune disease can have more severe infections and problems if they get sick. And that is true also for COVID. So like with all other vaccines, it's a discussion with your healthcare provider and looking at the risks and benefits of your particular situation. In terms of polio, again, we don't have anything to look back at and say, that we have any data to support the answer. So I cannot say mechanistically, it wouldn't really make sense for it to cause a flare of poliovirus, because again, it's an mRNA to a just one protein in the COVID virus, coronavirus. And so, it's different. However, I cannot say for sure at this point.
Any of the other colleagues want to weigh in this question? Okay, the next question is for Dr. Cecile, and I can't tell you how much misinformation and vagueness is happening here. For whatever it's worth, maybe that's what it is, but do we know how long, or do we have long-term adverse effects from the vaccine or long-term immunity from the vaccine?
Well, for long-term adverse effects, we didn't do long-term clinical studies yet. So we really cannot say for sure that there are no long-term adverse effects. However, from other vaccines, we know that usually vaccines don't cause any long-term adverse effects. And remember again that it's a messenger RNA vaccine, and therefore the chance of this vaccine causing long-term adverse effects is very negligible, if
Okay. Thank you.
For the, I guess there is a second part to your question, the long-term immunity. This question, I guess, actually was answered before, but just to reiterate, we don't again have data about long-term immunity. The longest we have is that we have neutralizing antibodies for like 3 months after the vaccine. But that's all we know. We don't really know if it's going to give us a long-term immunity or not.
Thank you. Nardeen, are vaccines actually needed? If we have a proper hygiene, hand washing, masks, distancing, why don't we stay like that without needing a vaccine?
Yeah, so I guess we hope that that was going to be the case after the last wave in April, and things kind of got better in summer for a little bit briefly until the second wave hit, and it hit really hard. So I know some arguments that I was reading were people kind of against the vaccines too, which I understand their concerns, but the argument was maybe they're needed more in areas with poor hygiene or underdeveloped areas. But actually, COVID proved us all wrong. I mean, despite the hygiene, despite how well developed and how much medications we have, yes, we do have antivirals this round. We did not the first round. We do have some treatment modalities we didn't have before, but we still not really able to defeat it without trying to prevent it. I mean, we still have, a fairly high mortality.
Thank you. Dr. Cecile, vaccination usually years to occur and to be implemented in the market. This vaccine.
Can you say it one more time? Can you start again, please?
I was trying to state that the history of vaccinations in general takes years for the vaccine to be designed, implemented, and used in the market. This vaccine, for lack of better terms, was really rushed. How can we trust it?
Well, to start with, I respectfully disagree, but it was not really rushed. The CDC actually told us that this vaccine, really went through very rigorous safety and efficacy standards, just like any other vaccine. And the FDA actually will not at all give a emergency use authorization unless the vaccine would actually meet these standards. So it was not rushed. What happened is that the efficiency of the process of emergency use vaccination authorization was actually just improved. But you know that the government, of course, give like startup funds to the companies to develop the vaccine and to actually start the clinical trials right away. And they also give them funds to basically manufacture millions of doses of the vaccine while they're doing the clinical studies. And the idea was this will save time. So by the time, when the time comes to actually receive the emergency use authorization, you'll have the vaccines right away, ready to give to the people. And this actually happened. It's amazing, just like almost the next morning, the vaccine started to be distributed. So that was really good. And actually the number of volunteers in the clinical studies was quite high. Because it's a pandemic, everybody, was really ready to be part of this clinical study just to get, the vaccines approved. So I don't think it was really rushed. It's just a combination of all these factors that caused, and it's really, I believe you said that it's really a miracle that we have this vaccine in less than a year from start to finish. The sequence of the virus was, determined in January. Here we are. We have already the vaccine, distributed. So
I want to, again, I hope the director of FDA, he's a radiation oncologist, Steve Haas, and I'm quoting him now, he said, "We did not cut any corners." They had a major monitoring body of scientists that were looking at the experiments. The experiments were not done by Pfizer or by Moderna, or for AstraZeneca's case as well. They were done by scientists in certain hospitals. There was no overseeing by the pharmaceutical company, and then they were monitored and audited by the FDA. So although it looks like rushed, there were no cutting corners. Veronica, another question regarding misperceptions. This virus will cause autism. This virus will change my gender. This virus will make me infertile. All of these things. Can you please group them in one answer?
I'll try to group them in one answer. The autism question is one that we have gotten for years. So just so everyone is aware, in 1998, there was a study released and conducted which suggested a link between vaccinations and autism spectrum disorder. This study then underwent further inspection and has since been retracted. It takes a lot to retract a study. The provider's medical license was taken away due to falsified information. Since that study, this link between vaccination and autism has been debunked in over 25 other studies that disproved a connection between autism and especially the MMR vaccine, which is implicated. There was even a study of over 95,000 children, with nearly 2,000 of those children considered to be even at risk for autism because they had an older sibling already diagnosed with autism. And that study confirmed that the MMR vaccine did not increase the risk for autism spectrum disorder. So this is something that we're still hearing in the popular media, and it unfortunately came from falsified information. In terms of infertility, in general, vaccination and looking at prior vaccines, again, we don't have data for obviously the mRNA vaccines, but looking at prior vaccines, little to no vaccine components can reach the ovaries or testicles in general. As Dr. Hani mentioned earlier, when we were discussing this, those are often called sanctuary sites in our bodies. They're very protected because they contain our reproductive genetic information. So, you know, that would be extremely unlikely to happen.
Okay. I'm going to start moving to another batch of questions that came now. And again, anyone can answer, please, because we did not really look at these questions beforehand. One of the questions is probably still related to Cecile and Veronica. I got hepatitis B and I developed severe arthritis after I got it. I'm very concerned if I take this vaccine that I may have maybe an immunological response that results in, let's call it severe arthritis. Is that possible? Should I be worried?
So I can try to answer this question. So there is an entity called Serum Sickness, which is a different type of immune reaction. It's not an allergic reaction per se, that can happen with things such as Hep B or the Hep B vaccine. It has been implicated as well. And serum sickness involves when the virus or an antigen, so an antigen is something that leads to production of an antibody. It pairs up with the antibody, and that complex can float around in your bloodstream and get stuck in your joints and cause other really inflammatory types of components in your bloodstream called complement to come to the site and cause inflammation. That is what serum sickness is, and the Hep B vaccine has been linked to it. What we know is that the phase 3 Pfizer trial included people with Hep B and C, and they did not have any serious adverse events. What we also know is that the Hep B vaccine is a different type of vaccine altogether from the Pfizer or Moderna mRNA vaccines, and those contain inactivated Hep B virus. And we know that serum sickness is linked to the size of the antibody and antigen complex. So we think that larger complexes have a higher risk of causing serum sickness, which is what you're describing, this arthritis, joint pain that happens after a vaccine, or even some drugs are implicated. It needs to be a large size component. The very small mRNA component, which is, again, like Dr. Cecile said, in the nanometer range, is very small. It's very different. So in the end, we don't know. That could be a possibility, but in general, serum sickness is a very low prevalence in the general population, and it's probably very low risk in the mRNA vaccines. But again, we have limited data.
Dr. Cecile, speaking about the nanoparticles, some claim that they are harmful to those with Alzheimer's disease. Do we have information?
I don't have any information about nanoparticles being harmful to the people with Alzheimer's disease. I did read something about targeting medicine to the brain in Alzheimer's disease via targeted nanoparticles. So nanoparticles are actually used to treat some brain injuries, you know, like Alzheimer's and other diseases. But I did not see anything about nanoparticles really causing or anything to do with Alzheimer's in terms of causing basically harm.
Thank you.
But again, that's all I know about that.
No, perfectly. It's unknown yet. I urge you to to from now on, let's try to be concise because we're getting a lot of questions. The next question is probably Nardeen's, but if anyone wants to help out, I'm going to group two questions together. Is the vaccine safe for those who have health problems, anemias, diabetes, asthma?
Actually, those would be the top priority to get the vaccines because those are the known risk factors for the disease itself, for having severe disease. So yes.
Actually, according to the guidelines of CDC, immediately after the frontline doctors, nurses, technicians, there will be the elderly, and soon after will be those who have comorbidities like the heart failure, kidney failure, asthma, diabetes, because those get very bad COVID. The question
may add, I'm sorry, Dr. Hani, if I just may add something too. Those high-risk patients, if tested positive for COVID and they received the monoclonal antibodies, it's recommended to wait 90 days until the vaccine. So I just thought it's noteworthy to put this out there because the monoclonal is a new modality we have right now, also under emergency use authorization, whether the bamlanivimab, the Lilly product, or the Regeneron, the antibody cocktail, as they call it. And if any of those patients with high risk and positive COVID received it, you will be entitled in 90 days, which is probably okay because by the time the vaccine comes to the general population, it'll be around then anyway.
Okay. The next group of questions, Veronica, are really related to are all ingredients similar from the ones from USA and China? And also, if you can be kind enough to answer, why do one vaccine has to be stored in dry ice and the other doesn't have to be?
So I presented the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine components or ingredients, and I do not know about the Chinese vaccine's ingredients. So I wouldn't be able to answer that part of the question. In terms of why one needs to be stored at a lower temperature, that has to do with the different stabilizers, pH stabilizers, the salts used. So they use different lipids and salts, and the Moderna vaccine, those components allows it to be stable at a temperature of just -4 degrees, whereas the Pfizer components need a lower temperature for stability.
Okay, thanks. Dr. Cecile, I think the question is trying to say, when do I become immune, or do you expect me to become immune after the second dose? Is it next day, or how does it work?
No, probably someone else can answer this question.
Okay,
I don't
Veronica?
have information about this one.
Or Nardine, do we have in the phase 3, when did they test the antibodies?
Not specifically when they tested the antibodies, but based on the graph of the positivity of the COVID, the positive COVID itself, they noticed from the graph that I showed earlier that about day 12, there was some partial improvement in the numbers, and the actual number, their primary endpoint, was 7 days after the second dose. And I believe the only reason it's not really based only on testing the antibodies, and Veronica can correct me if I'm mistaken, because it has both the B cell and the T cell immunity, like we spoke earlier. So it's not really only the antibodies, but some CD4 cells as well.
The next question, I'm going to try to answer it, but please correct me. Can the vaccine be offered to multiple myeloma patients? And I'm going to generalize it for any cancer. As long as their white counts and neutrophils are normal, and the doctor considers them a high risk to become COVID positive, unfortunately, cancer patients, whether myeloma or other cancer, when they get COVID, they're really, really very sick. So although we don't have data, unfortunately, this is a very common answer we say to every question. So please do not be upset from us, but we are trying to be very, very scientific and do not try to hedge or give you educated guess. But willing to give you the vaccine. The next question, I think also to Veronica, how the dilution is done with Pfizer vaccine. Is it possible they increase the diluent to the extent that becomes more diluted and I get less than what I'm supposed to get?
So I'm not a pharmacist, so I'll answer to the best of my ability, but there is a protocol for how to give anything, any vaccine, any IV solution. So I guess it's possible if they are not following the protocol that it will be too dilute. However, there's a certain protocol, there's a certain number of doses that come from each vial, and they're following a certain protocol with adding the right amount of saline or whatever diluent it is to the actual vaccine itself.
Okay, the next question is simple. We answered it before. If I have pulmonary embolism, yes, you can take the COVID vaccine because actually you are immune competent and you actually, hopefully, God forbid, you don't want to get COVID. The next question is about penicillin allergy. Is that you also, Veronica? Will answer that. Is there any problems taking the vaccine?
No, there should not.
Okay, I'm sorry, I have to go fast. So unless you want to add any more answers, just no. So you can take vaccine even if you are penicillin allergy. How long would the immunity from the vaccine last? We answered that question. Unfortunately, we do not have data today. The data is being collected. There is already 170,000 people immunized in the last week in the States. Almost all of them are nurses and physicians. We will know maybe in a month, in 6 months or so. So unfortunately, we don't have an answer. Is that vaccine coupled with the 5G thing that they talk about these days? Is that a link for tracking patients and that vaccine? Okay, Dr. Cecile. And while we are talking about it, let's bring the out there just to finish with it. The idea of the chip, can they control us? Can they put an electronic chip in that vaccine and they control us?
I don't know if they can or not, but basically they don't have anything like that in the vaccine. I mean, they published, Nardeen and Veronica told us about exactly what's in the vaccine in terms of salts, in terms of, adjuvant, everything what's in the vaccine, they told us. So there is nothing about, the chip or anything like that, or controlling us or anything like that. I mean, this is definitely fiction.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is a lot of misinformation happening there. There is, let me say it this way, there is nothing like that scientifically found that is going to be tried on human beings. I think the idea makes what is written in Revelation 13 about that you have to have the beast sign and you cannot sell or buy without it. So people use this vaccine as the idea of Bill Gates have done it and many governments have done it to control us. So far, although the idea may be plausible, but not for this vaccine. Maybe one day that will happen and we should resist it, but across all governments, it's not in this vaccine. Can a patient with liver transplant receive the vaccine? And of course, he's taking or she is taking anti-rejection medicine. Who wants to take that?
So I think it's kind of repeated that how those patients were not included in the study. So it's going to be a risk-benefit assessment. But even that risk-benefit assessment, the thought about immunosuppressed patients, not that they will get sick from the vaccine because it's not a live virus, it's not an attenuated virus. So the concern is really we don't know what kind of immune response they will mount to the vaccine. We're not sure how much T cells and B cell immunity they will be able to mount from that vaccine. But obviously it's something they will have to discuss with their transplant physician as well.
The next question, I'll answer it fast. Is there any information about younger than 18 years old? Both studies did not include less than 16, one 16 and Moderna was 18 and above. However, there are already a parallel study going on and we will know very soon. The name that was brought in today, Dr. Jordan Orange, mentioned that he will vaccinate children. He has no problem vaccinating children. and he thinks that children are just small adults and there should be no bad effects on them. He's the chairman of the pediatrics in Colombia, so he's not just a small authority. However, we don't have data as usual, but I can tell you physicians will be more able to do that once we have more studies. Again, there is repeated questions, Veronica, about autoimmune diseases and can the messenger RNA interact in a way with the DNA and cause problems in the future. Dr. Cecile, I think you brought that earlier. If you want to reconfirm.
Well, for the sake of time, we said it before, but basically the messenger RNA gets degraded right away. There is no chance really, or for it to go inside the nucleus or do anything like that, interacting with the DNA. And
to not to repeat the point again, but somebody's asking, can I get cancer from RNA?
Cancer is basically mutation in your DNA. So since we're saying it's very unlikely that this would happen, then definitely also unlikely for cancer to happen.
I want to confirm something. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Dr. Cecile mentioned it and showed it in a nice slide. The messenger RNA does not stay in the nucleus, does not enter the nucleus, and it's not long lasting. Am I right in this?
Yeah, it's made in the nucleus and then it gets out to the cytoplasm. Exactly. Once in the cytoplasm, it makes the protein and it gets degraded.
Okay. Is there any high risk? Yeah, we mentioned that for patients who have high blood pressure to get the vaccine earlier. Nardeen, you said they ought to take the vaccine. Many Catholic news sources have said that the vaccines are made with parts of aborted fetuses. Do we know if this is true? Yes, Nardeen.
No, I think Veronica mentioned all the ingredients already in her presentation. So Veronica, you may take that. I don't think you mentioned aborted fetuses, so not sure.
Are you hiding a fetus there?
Not hiding a fetus. So I can't confirm that. That is likely another, that's another source of misinformation. We know about the lipids, we know about the salts. They're not made, they don't need to come from, none of the ingredients need to come from aborted fetuses. These are all ingredients that we have and are made in the labs very routinely. So that is highly unlikely.
I just want to add one thing, guys. I want you to know that these studies were not paid or controlled by companies or governments or anything like that. They were independent scientists who were really doing the experiment. And believe me, there is a lot of honesty in these people. I know that all what we are hearing is they are messing up with us. Of course, I cannot use all the time to prove you wrong or right. That's your job to please study what we provided, and it's up to you. But people really blown a whistle and say they are using a fetus. Unfortunately, this is one of the political agendas. Somebody is sending a message, and I want to repeat it again just in case if I misrepresented myself. For those who are pregnant, there are not enough data, although there were some people, as Nardeen mentioned, that got pregnant while they are in the study. We don't have data on how the vaccine should or should not. However, I'm quoting somebody who is the chair of obstetrics in Cornell, and she mentioned that her department will be vaccinating pregnancy. And of course, at the end, it's up to the obstetrician of everyone.
If I may add something
yes,
to the previous question about the fetal tissues, Francis Collins, who's the chair of the NIH, he's a Christian, and he was trying actually to lobby or to educate the like the leaders of the churches, of the evangelical churches about the vaccine and all that. he said something, I can't remember everything that I read about it, but basically he said that they used in the specific vaccine, and I can't remember which one, but they used basically fetal cells to test the vaccine way at the beginning. But if you need more information, if you just Google probably Francis Collins and fetal tissue or anything like that, probably you'll get more information. You'll get exactly what he was saying. He's a very, very good guy. He's a Christian and a really good person.
Veronica, there is a question about PEG allergy test. Should we get a PEG allergy test to make sure we are not developing an allergic reaction?
No, in general, allergy testing is reserved for those who have had reactions in the past. So if you've had a reaction in the past, it's reasonable to get a test to see if you have a true allergy. Unfortunately, if you are just tested without a prior clinical reaction, there's a risk of a false positive. And then that could be a problem for you, because then you would be not able to receive other medications with that ingredient where you're not actually allergic to it. So you need to have had a reaction.
Sorry to put you on the spot. Do you know how prevalent PEG allergy is?
So
if you can, it's low?
It's low. It's not very, it's not prevalent, no.
Okay. Why haven't mRNA vaccines been used in the past, but
Well, actually, the RNA vaccine, there have been studies about it for some time, for a couple of decades at least, and studies done in like Zika and also in another disease. But anyway, because they've done some studies on it before, I mean, it's something new. Because they've done studies on it before, they were really ready now to go very fast on developing messenger RNA vaccine. I mean, it was really thanks to the studies that were done, for the last couple of decades about it. So yeah, the idea is new. Before that, all the DNA technology and all that is, recently that's picking up. But in the future, actually, it's going to be a very good vaccine, because actually in the future, it can be used to, basically target several diseases at the same time. You would basically include different messenger RNA for different proteins of different infectious agents, and basically include all in one nanoparticle and give it just one shot to the person, and you would immune this person against several diseases. So, I mean, it's picking up, and it's a very good vaccine.
What if by the time I'm being vaccinated, I am infected, but I didn't know?
So vaccinated, but I was already positive for COVID?
But I didn't know I'm positive.
An asymptomatic positive. So again, the recommendation, the consensus that yes, if you do have COVID, that you can get the vaccine right away as far as you're out of quarantine. Not because you cannot get it sooner, it's because we don't want you out there among healthy people while having COVID. So I don't think it will have any disadvantages or certain side effects. It's just the fact that you're out there in the community with a positive COVID is what we really don't like.
Okay. Somebody who has multiple problems, fibromyalgia, osteoporosis, asthma, rheumatoid arthritis. I think she's going for sacral surgery. How safe the vaccine for my case?
I think similarly to what we mentioned before, that, as long as it's not on immunosuppressive medications, I'm not sure if the rheumatoid arthritis is with immunosuppressive medications or not, but even if it won't be a contraindication, it's actually recommended, because the more medical problems, the more high risk you are to COVID.
Okay. I think there is a pharmaceutical, almost a pharmacy question, but I wonder if Veronica or Cecile, there is a confusion between reconstitution versus dilution. Can you please explain what it means when a medication needs to be reconstituted for administration?
So I'm not exactly sure, to be honest, of the difference. I can tell you that dilution is just adding a diluent, whatever that is. Reconstitution is often changing the composition. So maybe adding, another ingredient, for example, for greater stability. That's as far as I know.
I think reconstitution, and I could be wrong, but I think reconstitution is basically when you have it in a dry form, like powder, and you're adding liquid to it to bring it to solution, to make it a solution. And then dilution, of course, if it's already concentrated, it's in a solution, but concentrated, and you're adding more diluent to basically dilute it down, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's the difference really between the Pfizer and the Moderna, that the Pfizer needed that diluent for reconstitution, and once it is, then it's only set to be out there for 6 hours. And I think they interchangeably in the fact sheet used dilution and reconstitution just because it's reconstituted by a diluent. That's why I think.
There is a question, well, I'll try to handle it first, and then please, one of you can answer it. There are reportedly 4 cases of Bell's palsy with Pfizer vaccine. How concrete is the evidence that it was merely a coincidence? So for those who don't know, Bell's palsy meaning when you have a weakness of the muscles of one face and you feel like your mouth is a little shifted. It happens 10 to 15 cases per 100,000 in the normal population. And after 170,000 people immunized, they found 4 cases. So see this within the normal range of occurrence. Of course, we will never know, and your question is very good, if it is a direct correlation or not. But since it's so rare so far, and it's within the normal range, no one is doing anything except just keeping a report of it. Anyone wants to correct me or add something, please?
I think you answered it perfectly, and
So
that's exactly what it was in the study.
Okay. Okay. Does the vaccine cross the blood-brain barrier? I think we looked at that questions a lot before this forum, only because there was a question regarding the nanoparticles and the brain and Alzheimer's disease. And I know Dr. Cecile did a lot of research and we could not find information about it. But I mean, we don't want to guess, but anyone wants to give an educated guess? Okay, next question. Is it the mark of the beast? So we answered that question. I know this is common in the media and YouTube. I don't want to make this a spiritual topic here, but believe me, there will be a lot of other things happening, not just the mark of the beast when the beast comes in the final tribulation. So somebody responded to correct us. The dilution question may have been confused with the concept of reconstituting a medication from Pfizer versus Moderna. Dr. Meawad was stating that Pfizer vaccine comes in a vial as a powder and needs to be mixed with a specific amount of saline, makes a solution in the same way sugar is added to the tea. That vial can then produce 5 doses and last up to 6 hours, and it does not get diluted. So thank you for the information. Okay, so would the vaccine work for the new COVID strain in England? For those who, I hope I don't make them lose their sleep tonight, earlier today or late last night, there are several new strains found in United Kingdom that they think the virus is sort of modifying itself. We recently heard the lecture from an immunologist from England who does not believe yet that the vaccine will not be working. He thinks that the vaccine still should work, but they don't have data yet. So this is, we need to stay tuned to know if the current vaccine or vaccines are going to work on the new strain or not. I know Dr. Cecile also is looking into that. Please add to this if you wish to give us more information.
About what again?
About the new strains found in England. And could this...
Yeah, what they said, that the spike protein was actually, they found some mutations in the gene for the spike protein. So based on that, maybe, I mean, we don't know yet. We really don't know. But if this is true, if this is really the mutation affecting the conformation of the protein, the shape of the protein or something, and maybe this might affect, the response, of the vaccine to it. But again, we don't know. We don't know where are these mutations. We don't know whether that will affect the shape or the function of this protein. We don't know lots of things. So this is really remain to be seen if this will actually affect whether the vaccine will be, good for this strain or not, whether it would be effective or not.
So just to summarize this point, because it's a very urgent and we are all looking into it, please stay with the distancing, the mask and all of that. We knew that the virus can modify itself into different strains. Influenza does that almost yearly, and that's why the efficacy of the vaccine is only 44%. So far, the COVID-19, unless there is a COVID-20 and COVID-21, can be affected to 95% efficacy by the vaccine. So we hope it covers COVID-20, but we don't have data on this, but we need to be very careful. So far, Belgium, Italy, and United Kingdom have shut all their planes coming in and back and forth. There is no flying to these countries, so hopefully that does not come here. There is a question regarding, I think we answered it, but maybe somebody need to confirm it, is there will be annual vaccination or only 2 parts? And also, should a person, and this is maybe for Nardeen, in ICU as a result of COVID, gets the vaccine as therapeutic, as a therapy?
So as a therapy, no, I don't think there were any studies about that as a therapy. And there are certain guidelines that we're following from the NIH for therapy, which includes an antiviral, the remdesivir, which includes steroids or Decadron, because by the time someone reaches an ICU phase, they're usually through the whole cytokine storm. And it's mostly bilateral pneumonia and respiratory failure, not just the upper respiratory corona as we know it on the outpatient. So I don't think there's any talk yet about it used as a therapy. But as far as it being annual or not, that again, we said we don't really have enough data yet. We're hoping that it is lifelong immunity, but usually RNA viruses do mutate and they need booster vaccines in the future.
And I guess you would agree with me that it can be given to people who are on anticoagulants, right?
Yes.
Blood thinners. Okay. All right. I know there may be questions coming, but sorry, there's one more just came that wasn't repeated. I'm not covering the ones that were repeated before, so I hope nobody gets upset. You can go back and re-listen from the beginning because a lot of questions got repeated. There have been some suspicion that some health workers have had an allergic reaction from the vaccine due to an ingredient called polyethylene. I guess they meant the PEG. This ingredient may cause anaphylactic. Would you please elaborate on this? This is a very common question, Veronica, and maybe we should end with your answer one more time.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so there have been reports of adverse, what they're calling allergic reactions to the vaccine. Remember that it's common to have allergic reactions to drugs and vaccines. You have to remember the denominator. So you have to remember how many people overall are being vaccinated and how many people are having reactions. So, we've heard of maybe 10 overall, although thousands of people are being vaccinated. So that is a very low percentage. Those are, however, coming to light in the media. Secondly, yes, people can have allergy to polyethylene glycol. We've talked about this quite a bit. If you've had a reaction to a vaccine in the past, you should probably be tested or see an allergist or just not get the vaccine before getting this vaccine, because it can happen. Secondly, when you hear of someone having an allergic reaction, you have to keep in mind exactly what the symptoms are. So we heard of those 4 in Chicago. One of them, it seems, had true anaphylaxis. So hives and low blood pressure, you need hives plus another organ system, shortness of breath, low blood pressure, diarrhea, vomiting. That's anaphylaxis. That is what's treated with epinephrine. The others, such as tingling and tachycardia, can be anything from an allergic reaction, although much less likely an allergic reaction, to anxiety, a vasovagal reaction, some other type of reaction. So everything that you hear in the media, you have to think, what's the denominator? So how many patients are getting the vaccine? And remember that it's a small percentage overall. And secondly, is this a true allergic reaction, or is this an adverse effect, which may or may not actually be related to the vaccine?
Thank you. I want to end by saying we hope that we try to present to you the scientific data that's out there, because there are a lot of vagueness and a lot of confusion and a lot of uninformed thoughts are being thrown at all of us. It's very important that Simana, and I'm happy that these panelists are with me today, because they really did an amazing job in really deciphering what is true and what is myth, what is actual and what is a lie. And I hope you go back and listen to this again. And if you still have more questions, please email us or send us, and we will try to come on a monthly basis and do something similar to this, only because it doesn't look like we have the whole answer, as you can see. I hope you did not get upset that we kept saying we do not have an answer. If anything, it means that we are very honest with all of you. We did not guess. We try to tell you what we know, and if we don't, we tell you, unfortunately, it's unavailable information. Maybe some information will be available in the coming month, and we'll try to come back and present it to you. Until then, I urge you to please be safe and continue. Whether you want to take the vaccine or not, that's your call. We, as you know, we have not tried to persuade you or dissuade you, but it's your call. But at the end, be careful, because the virus is aggressive and the virus is deforming itself to become maybe a new virus. That means we are not off the hook, and we need to be careful. If you are 24 or around plus or minus 10 years old, please do not think of yourself as a hero and the virus is weaker than you. Unfortunately, many people who are in ICU today prove you wrong. So do not think because you are in the 20s or 30s, no, nothing can affect you. This was our old information. Now we know different. This second wave is affecting the younger people. I thank very much Dr. Cecile Andraos, Dr. Nardeen Mikhail, Dr. Veronica Meawad. Thank you so much for the time you spent and for your thoroughness and your scientific basis. May God bless everybody, and we hope to see you another time.